I'll let Don go ahead, start with a quick introduction. But while you do that, I just want to take a moment and thank Chris here before we even start. He has such a busy schedule, and out of all of that, if he's able to give this time to us with his new role at ACT, I'm just honored and thrilled to have him. Obviously, it's equally important to see Dr. Billy speak, and then Chip talking earlier today, and Chris. I'm very fortunate. Leaders of their caliber are willing to come and speak to this audience. It is nothing but a testament of some bit of recognition that InsuredMine is able to bring to the table of what we are able to influence or create that impact, or can I call it, a dent in this larger context of the technology that an independent agency needs today. So with that, I want to welcome Chris and Don. Don, go ahead and do a quick introduction and then get started.
Sure, thank you, Roshan. I really don't think you need an introduction, Chris. You've been in this industry for over 25 years. And, numerous agencies and carriers have sought your knowledge, whether it's on figuring out the perpetuation plan, mergers and acquisitions, or, just trying to get their agency or their company culture right. And I remember being on a call where we were looking at, this is, 5 years ago, on, transitioning the quoting model to make it more consumer focused. And it wasn't one side. It was, you were getting, the Agency Council for Technology was getting input from vendors, from carriers, from agents. And because we are all a part of this industry, we're all working with the same goal, which is to help people. That's what we all do. So again, immense amount of knowledge. And this year, you've actually stepped up, and you're the executive director of the Agents Council for Technology as of this spring. So Chris is going to talk to us, and I know you could have had much more time on this topic, on helping us to slow down so we can speed up, especially in this time where there's so much that seems like going faster and faster and faster than we are. So take it away, Chris.
Yeah, thank you so much. Looking to share my screen here, right? And the technology dude is supposed to know how to make this work. So let me know if you see a slide with a bunch of cars looking like they're about ready to crash. Everything look good? Cool. Well, thanks for the setup, Roshan and Don. Really appreciate the kind words, and definitely appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Maybe a little bit of changing gears. I was really fascinated by the last session and listening to Jennifer share some technical stories about how her agency ideally is using InsuredMine. And I think some things will parallel as we work through this. So the nature of this is a little bit more of a thought-provoking thing. It's a little less trainy, and hopefully it'll just get you thinking about transformative change in your agency or your business a little bit differently. And so this graphic, this theme is what we used for an article I just authored for IA Magazine. And it was something that I've been kind of just working on. And, maybe in 30 minutes, you'll think I'm a little bit loony, but I try to take common day things, everyday life, and create analogies around our industry. And so really where all this spawned for me, and we'll leave the brand names out of this, but about 18 months ago, I was driving through, decent sized US city. I had just done a keynote at one of the state Big I conventions. And I was kind of in a daze, right? We've all gone to these conferences and we're just inundated with thought. And we were talking about perpetuation and technology and efficiency and APIs and direct integration, diversity and inclusion, culture, all this stuff. And I was just thinking about it. But for some reason, driving through, in the city was Cincinnati, a billboard caught my eye. And it was a bright red car. It wasn't this one, but it was headed, the headline was, buy a car in as little as 11 minutes. And I don't know why it hit me. Maybe it was somewhat prophetic, but I thought about it for a second. 11 minutes, like who buys a car in 11 minutes? Who can afford it, for one, but more so, like, is it even the right thing to do? Is it responsible? What do the processes look like? And, I realized it was marketing hyperbole, and it was really trying to set an expectation of a different overall experience. And it didn't have to take all day to buy a car. And maybe somewhat ironically, I was literally driving a vehicle that I'd only owned for a couple of weeks, and I was the poster child. My wife and I spent nearly all of a Saturday in a dealership, had to take the 2-hour trip to go get lunch and come back and get everything done. But it was literally an all-day investment to buy a vehicle. So it got me thinking more and more about, like, what sort of metaphor or analogy from this buying a car in a little as 11 minutes, and how that would tie to our industry, right? Because we talk about pace of change a lot. And it just came up in the last one, like, we're behind, we're not moving fast enough. And the way I was thinking about it was, yeah, it doesn't need to take all day to buy a car. And we have a lot of experiences and things we do in our industry that don't need to take the equivalent of all day. But is 11 minutes really where we're trying to get to? Is that really what we want? I don't know, right? But it was something that got me thinking about it. And so this concept, this notion of speed, you see it all the time. Our industry loves to hammer on itself, and really those from outside our industry are even more prone to indicting us for being slow to adopt and to think about speed. And so, again, I try to connect weird dots together, and this is just the way I think about stuff. But speed to me is not a concept. It's an actual mathematics ratio. And we're not going to do math class, right? I failed out of, I'm not going to tell you what class in college where I ran out of horsepower from math, but it was after this, I promise you. And so it's distance over time. And so I bring this up only in that I think it's a challenge to those who just say we're not moving fast enough. Because in order to calculate speed, you either have to know how far you want to go or how far you went, and or have a desired time frame to get there, or know how long it took you to get someplace. And so when we think about change in our industry, 11 minutes versus all day, somewhere in the middle, I'm not convinced that we could get a bunch of people in a room in our industry and they would all agree on how far we need to go, where we're trying to get to, and how long we need to get there. But the notion around this is just kind of think about this in the context of, in order to get someplace, the distance is really an intentional place. It's something you're trying to accomplish. It's something that you are very clear about wanting to change or influence. And then time is clearly just that. It's when you want it done, and or how quickly you want to get something done. And then, so when you start to think about it that way, there's some objectivity to this, this conversation. And, when we think about speed, it kind of brings me back to this notion of, sometimes you got to slow down to actually have the most effective way, or the most efficient and quickest way to get where you're going to go. And so what is inside that is this concept of fundamentals. And our industry is built on fundamentals, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But I put some visuals up here, and I referenced some of these in the article I wrote, but I might be dating myself. But if you were a golf player or a golf fan and casually watched it in the 90s and 2000s, this gentleman on the left will look very, very familiar to you. This is Ernie Els. I always said Ernie Els, but I think Jim Nantz corrected the world and started calling him Ernie Els. But he was known for being a long hitter and an incredible striker of the ball, and was arguably one of the greatest players of his generation, if not all time. And here's a person that could hit the golf ball like few other human beings who will ever live. But his nickname was the Big Easy. And it was the Big Easy because his swing was so smooth, so slow, so effortless. But it was really built around fundamentals. But when it got to the point where the club head hit the ball, his club speed was phenomenal. So he was doing this big, sweeping, slow, calculated, fundamentally based swing, and he could hit the ball farther than I'm certain anybody on the call today, and by hundreds of yards further than I ever could. So there's some concept in that. And when you start to look at any golf training, you'll hear a lot about slowing down to speed up. Similar, if you're a race car fan, I used to do some auto racing in my days, mostly in the drag racing world. But if you do any sort of oval racing or road track racing, this concept of slowing down to speed up is a really robust conversation. You'll hear people saying, hitting your marks going into corner. You just cannot go full speed into any corner. Heck, even if you've ever just taken an on-ramp or an off-ramp on the freeway, you know that at some point in time, you have to slow down. You have to start to make a calculated corner, come to the right stop, and allow yourself to then accelerate through the corner. And so this notion of slowing down, controlling your speed, being very intentional about where you're trying to get to, where you need to brake, how you need to corner, and then when you can start to accelerate, actually generates faster lap times. So again, slowing down to speed up. And this is not new to the business world either. So if you Google slow down to speed up business consulting, you'll find pages of things from some of the most well-known, respected business consulting firms in the entire globe. And they will talk about this as well. Like, this is about being very clear, having a plan, knowing your why. Jennifer mentioned that before, and we'll spend a little bit of time on that, but taking the time to be very clear about what you're trying to do, understand your marks, and being clear about where it is you're trying to go is really important, because then it will allow you to be faster because there's clear focus and there's intentionality and alignment for what a business is trying to do. So fundamentals, being very clear about those and understanding what you're trying to do is slowing down before you just put your throttle on the gas, swing as hard as you can. Ernie Els didn't win any majors by flailing the golf club 70 times in a round as hard as he could, right? But this conversation of fundamentals creates a concept of polarity in our industry. And this is where I think the rubber meets the road for a lot of the things we talk about. And polarity is something I got exposed to in my time when I was with a carrier. And it's this concept of, is it an either or is it an and? And maybe the most common polarity in our industry is profitable growth. It seems like we wrestle with that and have for years and years before any of us were in the industry, and we will for years after. But when we think about technological change and are we moving fast enough and are we doing all the right things, we deal with this polarity that exists with these fundamentals that have far preceded all of us. And they're really the reasons we all have jobs. This is sound underwriting, adequate pricing, being very clear about paying the claims we owe, no less, no more. We're a compliance-heavy organization and industry. We're relationship-driven. People matter. We have 50 state regulations. But on the other hand, we're wrestling with the fact we know and we believe and we're adamant. And there are tools that enable this. The greater efficiency models, open APIs. How do we get better at single entry? Can we do more with direct integration? Putting more control in the hands of consumers, empowering agencies to be better, quicker, faster. Can we do things with more questions? I mean, this is a polarity of how do we do these things better, quicker, faster with all the tools at our disposal and still remain true to our fundamentals. And, I kind of put this up there because it's not really an excuse to not change. I mean, not changing is a choice, but I would also point out that our industry has actually done some things pretty well. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, maybe I'm showing my age, but I grew up in a period of time where personal auto insurance was rated largely by age, gender, and maybe your location. And we've come a long, long, long way from that using sophisticated tools, deeper levels of analytics. We've got incredibly multivariate pricing now that allows us to get much, much better at creating more unique pricing that represents the actual risk that we're insuring and allows us to maintain some of these fundamental things. So it is great to see how we're using technology to move things forward. First notice of loss is another one, right? That used to be handwritten accord form, faxed over to an agent, then faxed up to a carrier, and it would be several days before we could even get in touch with a client or even that the carrier knew there was a claim. Now we can go straight to the consumer and a person's in a rental car, in theory, within hours. So we are solving for these core fundamentals while also taking advantage of these capabilities. And so when we go back to distance over time and what we're trying to accomplish and slowing down the speed up, I mentioned those as a reminder and maybe just an affirmative point of view that we are doing some things. But if we take this thing into the future, while it is not an excuse or these core fundamentals that can sometimes weigh us down, perhaps from embracing change, or that can feel like they're in the way of change, it is worth pointing out that we're not manufacturing, widgets in our industry. And so, I mean, right here's my little Fire Stick remote. The TV's off, I promise you. But, if we were just trying to figure out a way to make this thing quicker, make it lighter, and make it cheaper, every one of those Fire Stick remotes is identical. And so there's far less risk and nuance. And in our industry, every single customer is slightly different. So when we're going through all of these processes and all of the things we're trying to do, this is an incredibly oversimplification of it. But if you're on the insurer side, we're trying to use all the tools, all the data, all of the opportunities at our disposal to figure out how to make $1 million bet. How can I, in the least amount of time, learn enough about any one of you to put $1 million of chips on the table as a bet that you know how to drive your car? And we all know that everybody out there is different because we do those things, but that's what makes it unique, is everything's complex. Everything is a little bit more sophisticated than the actual widget that we're talking about. And so it can feel daunting when you start to go through that. How do you know what to do, and how do you stay focused on what are the right ways to prioritize investments, whether it's data, whether it's underwriting, whether it's tools to help drive production across the top. And so it's very easy to get inundated or sort of overrun by this shiny new object syndrome. And I'm guessing everybody has seen this movie, or most of the folks have seen this movie. It's been sort of a holiday staple for many, many years. And so if you've seen it, I'm giving you the quick story here. But Clark Griswold set out with a very noble mission. He wanted to have the coolest holiday lights display in his little Chicago suburb. But in Clark Griswold fashion, zero thought, zero rationale, no planning. He nearly killed himself. He nearly destroyed his neighbors' homes, ruined the holidays for the entire family. Went down to, I'm assuming at that period of time, he went to Kmart, probably wasn't Lowe's or Menards or one of those types of things back in those days, but he just bought everything. And it was kind of what we're seeing agencies being faced with today. It's this, there's technology at every corner. If you follow social media or you go to the events, I mean, it can be very easy to experience FOMO and the fear of missing out. And, oh my gosh, if so-and-so is doing it, then maybe I should be doing it. And, there's a lot of that stuff going on. And it might even be more aggressive, right? Just following into the hype. So again, I'm just going to buy all the toys. If it works for so-and-so, it's got to work for me. And even if it doesn't, I'm going to figure out how to make it work. And well, as we all know, if we kind of use this Clark Griswold analogy, it did not work. None of the lights worked. And so, if he had come back, if he had had a plan, if he had slowed down, laid some things out, made some intelligent decisions, bought pieces that fit together, made sure all the plugs all worked together, understand where his own power switch was at least, then he might have had a better chance to kind of work through that. But what's even more complex, and I'm kind of winding back around here, and why this is just such a fascinating conversation, and why it's daunting for agents and brokers, but also encouraging, another math equation, right? Although this isn't necessarily as complex as a ratio, because 40,000 definitely equals 40,000. But what does that actually mean? And so big shout out to our team here at the Big I. The Universe study was just released. It shows now that there are 40,000 independent agencies in the US, plus or minus, which is a 4,000 net gain over the prior Universe study, where we were talking about 36,000. So we could spend some time on that alone. But in a world that was experiencing a global pandemic, and at least some subset of the $1 billion of InsurTech money had its sights set on putting many of us out of business, independent agency market share went up, and the number of independent agencies actually went up. So there's definitely something really cool about what we're all doing here. And I think what makes what Roshan and team are doing at InsuredMine cool, because you're providing tools and resources to help agencies who've taken the time and slowed down and are making great decisions about how to run their organization, give them the tools to do it. So what's the 40,000? It's a little bit cliche, but one of the things in my time working for the carrier and now at the Big I, I've learned is if you've met more than one agency, you've clearly seen different ways of running an independent agency. So hyperbolic statement, but if there's 40,000 agents, there's 40,000 ways of running an independent agency. And so whether an agency is on Main Street, wants to serve a couple of counties and service the community, that model is great. If you're an agency that wants to work 48 continental states, invest in all the top of the funnel SEO and sell minimum premium BOPs all over the country, phenomenal model also. There are very successful independent agency owners that live in both spaces. And I am not here to judge. Somewhere in that 40,000, there's a whole host of different models. But the point about all of that, and I try to make this as this, this sort of exaggeration here, is that no two agencies need the exact same tech stack. There's a lot of things we can learn from each other, but not overreacting to what necessarily everybody else is doing. And so this comes down to the people you're trying to attract, the customers you're trying to attack, and how you're trying to solve for those and enable your individual strategies. Again, once you've slowed down and you've laid out your plan, so you're not Clark Griswold, there's a lot of different ways to think through that. So it all starts with why. Another brilliant person, Simon Sinek, most of us may have read his book. It starts with why. It's a phenomenal book if you haven't, but in a nutshell, all of this starts with why and what it is you're trying to accomplish. And when we talk about agencies who have been successful, and it was a little bit of that in the commentary Jennifer made for Dealey Agency before this session now, but it was truly understanding the customers you're trying to attract, the employees you want, how you want to show up in your market, the geography you're trying to serve, the niches you want to serve. All of these things are infinitely critical in kind of framing out the specific strategy and the goals of an agency. And so without all of this, any technology solution is just a swing and it's just a shot in the dark. And so there's this old analogy that if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. That's where this comes back to. So this is really sort of at the center of slowing down before you speed up. Understand your why. Make sure you're very clear about it and what it is you're trying to accomplish. And successful agencies have done that. So it's okay to try new things, to experiment, maybe to even fail and fail forward. But the core of this is getting really clear about what it is you're trying to accomplish and then leveraging technology to help you get there. And so, it really comes down to this another age-old analogy that goes back to business consultants, really all over the United States. And I was exposed to this probably 20 years ago, but as this three-legged stool and the equitable balance that must exist between people, process, and technology. And so the spirit of this is, again, I thought it was great listening to Jennifer share their story. No technology change, no transformation in an organization, regardless of size, can be successful, or at least the chances for success are significantly reduced without an equitable focus on the people. And by people, that's culture, that's change management. Do you have the right roles defined? Do you have the right skill sets for people to be successful in those roles? Do you have the right processes, the right expectations, the right metrics to measure people? And so if we use that analogy, an agency that's trying to serve a couple of counties and be a Main Street type of firm needs different people and probably different processes and certainly a different set of technology capabilities than an agency who's trying to do things in 48 states and leveraging virtual assistants and maybe carrier service centers and the whole 9 yards. But bringing all of that stuff together is an hour in of itself. And it's just really critical to keep key focus on that. But the takeaway from this slide, I think that everybody hopefully would find something that resonates with them, is that technology in of itself is not a strategy. And so when I hear somebody say they want to be a digital agency, I immediately go, what does that even mean? All right. So starting with your why, and then you can digitize those processes, be efficient, be effective, leverage all the tools and capabilities to really bring your strategy to life. And there's a lot of technology out there that's capable of doing that, much like InsuredMine. And so with really all of that kind of rolling through this in a very efficient timeline, right? If in theory, if you start with your why, you hit your marks, you focus on the fundamentals, you're very clear about what it is you're trying to accomplish. There's focus on the people in your organization, the customers you're trying to solve, and you're supporting it with processes. Make intelligent and educated decisions around technology to bring it all that to life, then maybe the lights work, much like they did once Clark got some help from his wife and figured out how to make all this stuff work together. So appreciate everybody for giving me a chance to kind of share that. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen in case there's, I guess, any reactions, any questions. Looks like there's some chats. Either that's saying, get this guy, hang up, or if there's any questions. But yeah, I mean, any thoughts, any reactions, Roshan, anything you'd like to add, Don?
Go ahead,
I
Don.
got a lot, but I'm going. If you want to go first, Roshan, go ahead.
I just want to thank you, Chris, for formulating so much of thought in such a crisp way. That only happens when you have seen so many summers. And when I say summers, it's not because of the age; it's about of the experience. You have seen the transformation. What's the early days of technology to this latest DNA of APIs. And a lot have changed through, but you hit on the nail when you say technology cannot be a strategy, right? And I think that is the quote of the day is every agency has to take home that statement that technology can, and even though we are all about technology, but we say the same thing, is always InsuredMine the best option for you? The answer may be no.
I just loved how Jennifer made the comment, like it starts at the top and they're power user with you. And clearly it was, at least it was clear to me that they're finding great value. But part of that was setting very clear expectations and having processes. And so if you're going to invest in a tool with the power that yours brings, tell people what to do with it and what you expect of them to do and how that's going to bring value and the transparency that comes with a healthy culture. It's not just here, go drop this technology and into a world. And so I don't know, I've kind of cheesily said, right, our industry has InsureTech Connect and several of us have been there and it's a phenomenal event. I'd love to have an insurance people connect or an insurance process connect and to kind of bring some props to the fact that it takes healthy focus on all three pieces for success.
Yep. You are absolutely right. It's not just the technology, it's all the amalgamation of all the three: people, process, technology. How do you bring them together? Otherwise, you are trying to build something in isolation.
Well, awesome. This is actually deeper than just this conversation because, I think Warren Buffett said something a few years back where they asked him, what does he feel the future holds for us? And he says it's bright because we're approaching a time, or we're in a time where we have more availability to talent and knowledge than we've ever had in the past. He made a comment that his sisters were smarter than him, but because he grew up in the 50s, they didn't have the same opportunities that he had. And so now as the internet and as more of the world becomes connected, you're giving more people the opportunity to find ways to make improvements in that process or that process and that process. And with every iteration of improvement, it opens the door for someone else to find a way to make something else better. So it just keeps leveling up faster than we can keep up. It's pretty astounding. And now we've got quantum computing, which should be used in businesses and by the end of this decade. So, wow.
Awesome.
All right, Montserrat, back to you. You are the taskmaster keeping us all straight on schedule.